Okay, guys, this is part 3, January 27th. Good afternoon. Just bear with me. Okay.
A surprising and terrible empowerment. Misuse for destruction. Let's suppose that the problems of AI autonomy have been solved. We are no longer worried that the country of AI geniuses will go rogue and overpower humanity. The AI geniuses do what humans want them to do, and because they have enormous commercial value, individuals and organizations throughout the world can rent one or more AI geniuses to do various tasks for them. Everyone having a super intelligent genius in their pocket is an amazing advance and will lead to an incredible creation of economic value and improvement in the quality of human life. I talk about these benefits in great detail in Machines of Loving Grace. But not every effect of making everyone superhumanly capable will be positive. It can potentially amplify the ability of individuals or small groups to cause destruction on a much larger scale than was possible before, by making use of sophisticated and dangerous tools, such as weapons of mass destruction, that were previously only available to a select few with a high level of skill, specialized training, and focus. As Bill Joy wrote 25 years ago in Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, 20. Building nuclear weapons required, at least for a time, access to both rare, indeed, effectively unavailable, raw materials and protected information. Biological and chemical weapons programs also tended to require large-scale activities. The 21st century technologies, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics, can spawn whole new classes of accidents and abuses, widely within reach of individuals or small groups. They will not require large facilities or rare raw materials. We are on the cusp of the further perfection of extreme evil, an evil whose possibility spreads well beyond that which weapons of mass destruction bequeath to the nation-states, to a surprising and terrible empowerment of extreme individuals. What Joy is pointing to is the idea that causing large-scale destruction requires both motive and ability, and as long as ability is restricted to a small set of highly trained people, there is relatively limited risk of single individuals, or small groups, causing such destruction. 21. A disturbed loner can perpetrate a school shooting, but probably can't build a nuclear weapon or release a plague. In fact, ability and motive may even be negatively correlated. The kind of person who has the ability to release a plague is probably highly educated, likely a PhD in molecular biology, and a particularly resourceful one, with a promising career, a stable and disciplined personality, and a lot to lose. This kind of person is unlikely to be interested in killing a huge number of people for no benefit to themselves and at great risk to their own future. They would need to be motivated by pure malice, intense grievance, or instability. Such people do exist, but they are rare and tend to become huge stories when they occur, precisely because they are so unusual. 22. They also tend to be difficult to catch because they are intelligent and capable, sometimes leaving mysteries that take years or decades to solve. The most famous example is probably mathematician Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who evaded FBI capture for nearly 20 years and was driven by an anti-technological ideology. Another example is biodefense researcher Bruce Ivins, who seems to have orchestrated a series of anthrax attacks in 2001. It's also happened with skilled non-state organizations. The cult Aum Shinrikyo managed to obtain sarin nerve gas and kill 14 people, as well as injuring hundreds more, by releasing it in the Tokyo subway in 1995. Thankfully, none of these attacks used contagious biological agents, because the ability to construct or obtain these agents was beyond the capabilities of even these people. 23. Advances in molecular biology have now significantly lowered the barrier to creating biological weapons, especially in terms of availability of materials, but it still takes an enormous amount of expertise in order to do so. I am concerned that a genius in everyone's pocket could remove that barrier, essentially making everyone a PhD virologist who can be walked through the process of designing, synthesizing, and releasing a biological weapon step by step. Preventing the elicitation of this kind of information in the face of serious adversarial pressure, so-called jailbreaks, likely demands layers of defenses beyond those ordinarily baked into training. Crucially, this will break the correlation between ability and motive. The disturbed loner who wants to kill people but lacks the discipline or skill to do so will now be elevated to the capability level of the PhD virologist, who is unlikely to have this motivation. This concern generalizes beyond biology, although I think biology is the scariest area to any area where great destruction is possible, but currently requires a high level of skill and discipline. To put it another way, renting a powerful AI gives intelligence to malicious, but otherwise average, people. I am worried there are potentially a large number of such people out there, and that if they have access to an easy way to kill millions of people, sooner or later one of them will do it. Additionally, those who do have expertise may be enabled to commit even larger scale destruction than they could before. Biology is by far the area I'm most worried about because of its very large potential for destruction and the difficulty of defending against it, so I'll focus on biology in particular. But much of what I say here applies to other risks, like cyber attacks, chemical weapons, or nuclear technology. I am not going to go into detail about how to make biological weapons, for reasons that should be obvious. But at a high level, I am concerned that LLMs are approaching, or may already have reached, the knowledge needed to create and release them end to end, and that their potential for destruction is very high. Some biological agents could cause millions of deaths if a determined effort was made to release them for maximum spread. However, this would still take a very high level of skill, including a number of very specific steps and procedures that are not widely known. My concern is not merely fixed or static knowledge. I am concerned that LLMs will be able to take someone of average knowledge and ability and walk them through a complex process that might otherwise go wrong or require debugging in an interactive way, similar to how tech support might help a non-technical person debug and fix complicated computer-related problems, although this would be a more extended process, probably lasting over weeks or months. More capable LLMs, substantially beyond the power of today's, might be capable of enabling even more frightening acts. In 2024, a group of prominent scientists wrote a letter warning about the risks of researching and potentially creating a dangerous new type of organism, mirror life. The DNA, RNA, ribosomes, and proteins that make up biological organisms all have the same chirality, also called handedness, that causes them to be not equivalent to a version of themselves reflected in the mirror. Just as your right hand cannot be rotated in such a way as to be identical to your left. But the whole system of proteins binding to each other, the machinery of DNA synthesis and RNA translation, and the construction and breakdown of proteins, all depends on this handedness. If scientists made versions of this biological material with the opposite handedness, and there are some potential advantages of these, such as medicines that last longer in the body, it could be extremely dangerous. This is because left-handed life, if it were made in the form of complete organisms capable of reproduction, which would be very difficult, would potentially be indigestible to any of the systems that break down biological material on Earth. It would have a key that wouldn't fit into the lock of any existing enzyme. This would mean that it could proliferate in an uncontrollable way and crowd out all life on the planet, in the worst case, even destroying all life on Earth. There is substantial scientific uncertainty about both the creation and potential effects of mirror life. The 2024 letter accompanied a report that concluded that mirror bacteria could plausibly be created in the next 1 to few decades, which is a wide range. But a sufficiently powerful AI model, to be clear, far more capable than any we have today, might be able to discover how to create it much more rapidly and actually help someone do so. My view is that even though these are obscure risks and might seem unlikely, the magnitude of the consequences is so large that they should be taken seriously as a first-class risk of AI systems. Skeptics have raised a number of objections to the seriousness of these biological risks from LLMs, which I disagree with, but which are worth addressing. Most fall into the category of not appreciating the exponential trajectory that the technology is on. Back in 2023, when we first started talking about biological risks from LLMs, skeptics said that all the necessary information was available on Google and LLMs didn't add anything beyond this. It was never true that Google could give you all the necessary information. Genomes are freely available, but as I said above, certain key steps, as well as a huge amount of practical know-how cannot be gotten in that way. But also, by the end of 2023, LLMs were clearly providing information beyond what Google could give for some steps of the process. After this, skeptics retreated to the objection that LLMs weren't end-to-end useful and couldn't help with bioweapons acquisition as opposed to just providing theoretical information. As of mid-2025, our measurements show that LLMs may already be providing substantial uplift in several relevant areas, perhaps doubling or tripling the likelihood of success. This led to us deciding that Claude Opus 4 and the subsequent Sonnet 4.5, Opus 4.1, and Opus 4.5 models needed to be released under our AI Safety Level 3 protections in our responsible scaling policy framework. And to implementing safeguards against this risk, more on this later. We believe that models are likely now approaching the point where, without safeguards, they could be useful in enabling someone with a STEM degree, but not specifically a biology degree, to go through the whole process of producing a bioweapon. Another objection is that there are other actions unrelated to AI that society can take to block the production of bioweapons. Most prominently, the gene synthesis industry makes biological specimens on demand, and there is no federal requirement that providers screen orders to make sure they do not contain pathogens. An MIT study found that 36 out of 38 providers fulfilled an order containing the sequence of the 1918 flu. I am supportive of mandated gene synthesis screening that would make it harder for individuals to weaponize pathogens in order to reduce both AI-driven biological risks and also biological risks in general. But this is not something we have today. It would also be only one tool in reducing risk. It is a complement to guardrails on AI systems, not a substitute. The best objection is one that I've rarely seen raised, that there is a gap between the models being useful in principle and the actual propensity of bad actors to use them. Most individual bad actors are disturbed individuals, so almost by definition their behavior is unpredictable and irrational, and it's these bad actors, the unskilled ones, who might have stood to benefit the most from AI, making it much easier to kill many people. 24. Just because a type of violent attack is possible doesn't mean someone will decide to do it. Perhaps biological attacks will be unappealing because they are reasonably likely to infect the perpetrator. They don't cater to the military-style fantasies that many violent individuals or groups have, and it is hard to selectively target specific people. It could also be that going through a process that takes months, even if an AI walks you through it, involves an amount of patience that most disturbed individuals simply don't have. We may simply get lucky and motive and ability don't combine in practice in quite the right way. But this seems like very flimsy protection to rely on. The motives of disturbed loners can change for any reason or no reason, and in fact there are already instances of LLMs being used in attacks, just not with biology. The focus on disturbed loners also ignores ideologically motivated terrorists, who are often willing to expend large amounts of time and effort, for example, the 9/11 hijackers. Wanting to kill as many people as possible is a motive that will probably arise sooner or later, and it unfortunately suggests bioweapons as the method. Even if this motive is extremely rare, it only has to materialize once. And as biology advances, increasingly driven by AI itself, it may also become possible to carry out more selective attacks, for example, targeted against people with specific ancestries, which adds yet another, very chilling, possible motive. I do not think biological attacks will necessarily be carried out the instant it becomes widely possible to do so. In fact, I would bet against that. But added up across millions of people and a few years of time, I think there is a serious risk of a major attack, and the consequences would be so severe, with casualties potentially in the millions or more, that I believe we have no choice but to take serious measures to prevent it. Defenses.
Okay.
Against these risks. Here I see 3 things we can do. First, AI companies can put guardrails on their models to prevent them from helping to produce bioweapons. Anthropic is very actively doing this. Claude's constitution, which mostly focuses on high-level principles and values, has a small number of specific hardline prohibitions, and one of them relates to helping with the production of biological, or chemical, or nuclear, or radiological weapons. But all models can be jailbroken, and so as a second line of defense, we've implemented, since mid-2025, when our tests showed our models were starting to get close to the threshold where they might begin to pose a risk, a classifier that specifically detects and blocks bioweapon-related outputs. We regularly upgrade and improve these classifiers, and have generally found them highly robust even against sophisticated adversarial attacks. 25. These classifiers increase the costs to serve our models measurably. In some models, they are close to 5% of total inference costs, and thus cut into our margins, but we feel that using them is the right thing to do. To their credit, some other AI companies have implemented classifiers as well. But not every company has, and there is also nothing requiring companies to keep their classifiers. I am concerned that over time there may be a prisoner's dilemma where companies can defect and lower their costs by removing classifiers. This is once again a classic negative externalities problem that can't be solved by the voluntary actions of Anthropic or any other single company alone. 26. Voluntary industry standards may help, as may third-party evaluations and verification of the type done by AI security institutes and third-party evaluators. But ultimately, defense may require government action, which is the second thing we can do. My views here are the same as they are for addressing autonomy risks. We should start with transparency requirements, 27, which help society measure, monitor, and collectively defend against risks without disrupting economic activity in a heavy-handed way. Then, if and when we reach clearer thresholds of risk, we can craft legislation that more precisely targets these risks and has a lower chance of collateral damage. In the particular case of bioweapons, I actually think that the time for such targeted legislation may be approaching soon. Anthropic and other companies are learning more and more about the nature of biological risks and what is reasonable to require of companies in defending against them. Fully defending against these risks may require working internationally, even with geopolitical adversaries, but there is precedent in treaties prohibiting the development of biological weapons. I am generally a skeptic about most kinds of international cooperation on AI, but this may be one narrow area where there is some chance of achieving global restraint. Even dictatorships do not want massive bioterrorist attacks. Finally, the third countermeasure we can take is to try to develop defenses against biological attacks themselves. This could include monitoring and tracking for early detection, investments in air purification R&D, such as far UVC disinfection, rapid vaccine development that can respond and adapt to an attack, better personal protective equipment, PP 28, and treatments or vaccinations for some of the most likely biological agents. mRNA vaccines, which can be designed to respond to a particular virus or variant, are an early example of what is possible here. Anthropic is excited to work with biotech and pharmaceutical companies on this problem. But unfortunately, I think our expectations on the defensive side should be limited. There is an asymmetry between attack and defense in biology, because agents spread rapidly on their own, while defenses require detection, vaccination, and treatment to be organized across large numbers of people very quickly in response. Unless the response is lightning quick, which it rarely is, much of the damage will be done before a response is possible. It is conceivable that future technological improvements could shift this balance in favor of defense, and we should certainly use AI to help develop such technological advances. But until then, preventative safeguards will be our main line of defense. It's worth a brief mention of cyber attacks here, since unlike biological attacks, AI-led cyber attacks have actually happened in the wild, including at a large scale and for state-sponsored espionage. We expect these attacks to become more capable as models advance rapidly, until they are the main way in which cyber attacks are conducted. I expect AI-led cyber attacks to become a serious and unprecedented threat to the integrity of computer systems around the world, and Anthropic is working very hard to shut down these attacks and eventually reliably prevent them from happening. The reason I haven't focused on cyber as much as biology is that, 1, cyber attacks are much less likely to kill people, certainly not at the scale of biological attacks, and 2, the offense-defense balance may be more tractable in cyber, where there is at least some hope that defense could keep up with, and even ideally outpace, AI attack if we invest in it properly. Although biology is currently the most serious vector of attack, there are many other vectors, and it is possible that a more dangerous one may emerge. The general principle is that without countermeasures, AI is likely to continuously lower the barrier to destructive activity on a larger and larger scale, and humanity needs a serious response to this threat. 3.
Okay.
The odious apparatus. Misuse for seizing power. The previous...
Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to go to the next one.